So this morning we'll be talking to Radhia Gleis, who wrote the book, The Followers, Holy Hell and the Disciples of Narcissistic Leaders. And we'll also be showing a little bit of a video that she talks about in her book, which will give you a better idea of these people and the cult that her book is all about. So without further ado, let's talk to Radhia. Hi, Radhia.
Hi, David.
So first thing, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll move on into your
Well, about myself, that's a long story. That's what
Yes,
the
it
first
is.
part of my book is
In
about.
fact, that's what you wrote about.
I grew up in Los Angeles, and I live here in Austin, Texas. I'm a certified clinical nutritionist, biochemical analyst. I'm a writer, an artist, all kinds of. I've lived a very interesting life.
You certainly have. Yeah, I liked your book. Let's go into your book and talk about, if you would, just please give us an overview of what the book is about and why you wrote it.
Well, back in 2016, I left the group in 2006.
Okay, what was the name of the group?
The group, it was loosely called the Buddha Field. That was our nickname for it. It didn't have a formal name. But when the film came out in 2016, that's really when a lot of the details came to light for me. I left, but I didn't get the real deep details of what was going on until Will Allen, the filmmaker, started interviewing me for the book, and I had rekindled my relationship. When I left, they demonized me and ostracized me, and I didn't speak to many of my best friends for years. And then they finally left and reconnected with me. So when we started interviewing for the film, I started really getting the details of what was going on. And simultaneously, that was in 2016. So in 2016, when the film was released, was the election year. And yes. So I was sort of re-traumatized. I was seeing two evidences of narcissistic personality in front of me. And so I had decided that it was really important that I come forward and start to analyze and review why we make the decisions we make, and when I was in the Q&A, the film was at Sundance Film Festival. It also went on to many of the film festivals that I was participant in here in Austin, Los Angeles, Hawaii, and whatever. And people would ask me questions in the Q&A, and some people would say, they see the film and they go, I get it. I would like to, belong to that group. And then others, would say, well, how could you fall for that? I'd never be that stupid. And so I decided to write the book to really analyze. One, I'm neither stupid nor uneducated. So how is it that I could go for so long being
involved with
manipulated like that?
Yeah.
But David, I always say when people ask that, do you think that the investors that invested in Bernie Madoff were stupid? I think not. All those millionaires that got taken by a con man. It doesn't have anything to do with intellect. It has nothing to do with education. It has a lot to do with what you want and what you're looking for. And a narcissist will find those people and give them what they want.
Right.
So there's sort of that feedback loop, and so I decided to really get in there and analyze that. And that's what my book is about.
So let me play a little bit of this Holy Hell trailer. And let's talk about that.
My sister introduced me to her spiritual teacher. And
are these good pictures of the characters that people in your group, or that were in your group?
Well, yeah, those are us. I mean, he had the archival footage of 30 years. So you're going to see me. I'm in there somewhere. I'm interviewed, but you'll also see me there when I'm about 29 or 30.
So where was this filmed?
So that's me, actually, right there in the red. Where was that filmed? Well, Will was the sort of videographer of the Buddha Field. So these are various different shots of years of retreats that we were on, or sometimes Will would do sort of fantasy videos for us for Christmas or things like that. So throughout the years, Will would video us.
Right.
That's how Sundance basically acknowledged that Will had some of the oldest archival footage ever presented at Sundance.
Stranger, more paranoid, and more possessive. You can't say no. No is against the rules. He wanted to be worshipped. He wanted to be God. If you can't stand naked in front of your master, you can't stand naked in front of your God. This is scientific.
That's me.
It's so hard to believe.
So where was the home base of this group?
I thought we were bad.
Well, originally, and as I say, I often say it's sort of like a frog in warm water. I mean, when it originally started back in the early 80s, it really had very little to do with him.
No, but where were you guys?
We were in Los Angeles.
Okay.
He started it really with a really small group of about 8 people in Florida. And then he moved to Los Angeles, and I got involved with them in 1984, although I had met him prior to that, just as a friend, just as a person, a few years prior to that, via a mutual friend of ours. But at the time, he was no guru. He was sort of a teacher and a friend. He was giving acting classes and things like that. And there was about 15 of us. And the whole thing, I mean, back at that time in Los Angeles, really, David, there was a cult on every block.
Oh,
I
lived in San Francisco.
Exactly. So you
Yeah.
had your Scientologists, and you had your Moonies, and your
The
Hare
cults that you
Krishnas
never
and whatever.
hear of. Yeah.
Yeah. So we, a lot of things were happening at that particular time. And there was a lot of movement going on, civil rights and gay rights and women's rights. And, there was a great deal of upheaval at the time. And so people were looking for something different, and so this was based on a meditation technique that was passed down from Maharaji. And, Jaime stole it from him. He was never a disciple of Maharaji's. He conned a Premi into giving him the techniques. And then he was, in the beginning, just giving the techniques. He was really not taking on the role of a master or anything like that. But he had narcissistic tendencies, and basically we helped to, ignite that malignancy in
Right.
him. So it was like a frog in warm water. It didn't happen overnight. It happened through a period of time. And so in the beginning, it was all about connect to God's love. And then after a while, the narrative changed to connect to my love. And he really started to feel like, hey, this is kind of nice. I like people bowing down to me,
Right.
Yeah.
So does it still exist, or is it gone?
Yes, unfortunately it does. I mean, we pretty much ran him out of Austin in in 2006. And he fled to Hawaii and started it. He left for Hawaii and some people followed him, and he, started it up again. And I don't keep tabs on him, but I understand there's about, I don't know, maybe 100 people with him today. And they it was kind of like when the film came out, he responded, to his disciples, basically saying, oh, it's fake news. It's like he accused Will of just being a disgruntled lover who was out, had a vendetta against him and whatever. And he convinced the followers not to see the film. Don't look at the truth, and it's all a lie and it's all fake news and blah, blah, blah. And that sounded real familiar to me in 2016.
So who was the disgruntled people who actually made the video? Because it's a very negative video, correct?
Yeah, well, Will Allen was the filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were all disgruntled. All of those people in the film left in 2006 when the truth came out. And it wasn't for years that we found out the detail of the abuse. And one of the reasons also that I wrote the book is I'm a female, and the leader, Jaime, is a homosexual. So we had a different experience than the males. We were not physically abused. And so I really wanted to tell my story, number one. And I wanted to broaden the viewpoint because, Jaime is a malignant narcissist and a sociopath, and he's very skilled at compartmentalizing. So, Jaime would become whatever you needed him to become.
Right.
So there's, maybe 150 of us, and there's probably 150 different stories. And that's why I wanted to, in my book, broaden the perspective. It's not about sex abuse. It's about manipulation. It's about being conned. And so I really wanted to expand the viewpoint because, there's a good portion of our country that's being conned today. And I'm kind of experienced in what that's like. And it has nothing to do with being stupid.
And I think your point on the whole country being conned on a lot of things, I agree with you. But I agree also that right now we have what I call no news. I mean, we have, I look at different news media. I look at Al Jazeera, for example. I look at CNN. I look at BBC. I look at Fox. And well, like CNN to me, is turned into a place where you basically read about celebrities, and you get very little news. You get a lot of, they're for the Democrats. Fox is for the Republicans. So you almost have to turn to these other places like Al Jazeera, which people say, oh, well, that's all Muslims and horrible stuff. But basically, Al Jazeera talks about international news, and you don't read about.
Absolutely. So does the BBC.
And BBC. Yeah. And it's pitiful that I go there and I look, I don't even have to read an article because I can see right off from the title that it's going to be a hate piece. And so there's no point in going any further. I already know that it's not like the old news where it was actually news. This happened.
You're absolutely right. We all have our little echo chambers, and that is what media, what cable, and what the internet has sort of done to our society. And in a way, it's very weird. It's almost like we are in our own little cults with those echo chambers.
Yes.
They basically like the narcissist, like Jaime, like anybody else who will feed you what you're looking for. Unfortunately, that's kind of what the news has become. And I had somebody ask me, and it was a really interesting interview from Austin 360. And he said, do you think that the media is not taking enough responsibility of exposing these cults? And honestly, David, my answer was, what media are you talking about?
Yes.
Because really media right now today is looking for sound bites that'll sell their product, and
Yes.
they'll do it, unfortunately, at the behest of the person that may, if you're talking about my life or people's lives in a cult, we're dealing with trauma. We're not fodder for your, clicks and your viewership.
Right.
So I look for, and I hope that I will find media that is going to be sensitive to that and not just be used by media.
Yeah, I mean, like to me, so much of it's like the National Enquirer now. You used to, check, you do the checkout and you see this, Bigfoot did this or Bigfoot did that. And Bigfoot is married to Elvis or whatever. Crazy stuff. I mean, and now, I mean, I'm just looking at CNN, by the way, right now. It says, Anderson Cooper shares his fast food guilty pleasure. That's the top news. Who cares? I mean, really,
Yeah.
Who cares? I don't care. I could care less.
Right.
Big deal. See Philip Seymour Hoffman's son star in Paul Anderson's Licorice Pizza. Again, this is not big news.
Yeah.
At the same time,
well, they have the challenge of dealing with now the news. I mean, you and I remember when the news was, 6 o'clock in the evening, it went for about a half an hour and that was it,
Yes.
Now it's a 24-hour, show, and they have to provide whatever they can provide, and they rehash the same stuff over and over again. And it is a dilemma. I
you
understand
say that,
it.
Why does Al Jazeera come out with so much real, what I call real news? They talk about what's going on in the world. They talk about us too, they actually do, but like unprecedented power cuts in China hits home factories. Joe Biden faces defining moment in US presidency. Tunisian parties announce coalition to counter President Saeed or something. I can't pronounce his name, probably. But it's real, to me, like a lot of real news here all across the world.
I think that's a
Bangkok
major.
alert, deadly floods hit a third of Thailand. Do we know that here? We don't know that.
Yeah, I think that's very much a part of the problem of what is going on in this country and the divide, the schism. Again, people will tune into their echo chamber, their favorite echo chamber. I have my favorite echo chambers. I'm fully aware, of what I want to see or hear. And that's kind of where it's become. And it is a sad place we've come to.
Yes. Yeah. It is. I mean, I have two sons, by the way. One is a diehard Republican, one is a diehard Democrat. Do they get along? No. And it's awful to think, that we're at this point where they can hardly talk to each other without getting really upset with each other about how could you think this, or how could you support this person, or how could you, and I must admit, I really feel like in the last two elections, these two parties have provided us with really no one to vote for. To me, it's been just a terrible situation, these two political parties that we have here, providing us people who are inept. I think we are,
when
as bad as it was
when I left the Buddha field, and I refer to it, we had the innies and the outies. And so that divide was brutal. It doesn't matter how small or how large the society is, when you are steeped in indoctrination, you are sort of subject to that divide, especially when the indoctrination is so critical to your identity.
Right.
And when I left, which is one reason why I didn't leave the group for, oh my God, I wanted to leave in 1995. I actually didn't leave until 2006. And that's a really complicated story. But part of it was I knew that when I left, I would be demonized. I knew that I would be ostracized. I knew that I wouldn't be accepted, on the outside. And this is what has happened in our country.
Okay, you're saying that you felt like you admitting that you had been with this cult, that people outside would ostracize you from their own communities.
No, people on the inside would
But
ostracize
who
me.
cares since you were leaving them?
Well, yeah. And when you have nobody because you've spent 20 some odd years
Okay,
in your life,
right,
when there is nobody on the outside,
right.
I had to leave 150 of my best friends and family,
Okay.
So
Right,
I
understand that.
it was a challenge. And when I left, there was nobody. I
Yes.
was pretty much isolated. And that's a very, very frightening thing. And I also didn't believe that, and that's part of the indoctrination, that there was anybody on the outside that I would be able to relate to, because we were so insulated in our own ideology and our own lifestyle. And that was part of the narrative. We referred to ourselves as holy company, as opposed to the dead world out there. And so it was a very different and very challenging place to go out into the desert, basically. Right. Yeah.
So you left it, and then how did you get into the real world again? I mean, how did you assimilate?
Well, it wasn't easy.
Right. And what did you go through?
It still is. Even after 15 years, there are still things that that I went through for 20 some odd years. I lived a life that very few people will ever experience.
Right.
And so that's a part of my life that no matter, other than my friends now who have also left the Buddha field, which I have rekindled those relationships, the outside people they just will never know. They will never understand. I mean, it wasn't a couple of years stint. It was 25 years of my adult life, So, that makes it and made it a challenge from the get-go. And it's very difficult knowing when I left, knowing that all these people that I loved and that I had such a deep connection with would hate me. And, even Will Allen, who is the filmmaker, he didn't leave right away. He went to Hawaii with the guru. And I brought him to the Buddha field when he was 21 years old. I invited him. He's now, I think he's like 57, right? So when I left, he was like my best friend. And when I left, he wouldn't even speak. He wouldn't even use my name. He referred to me as that woman, and so that happened basically immediately. So imagine how painful that is to be ostracized and demonized that quickly. It's a shock to the system. And I knew that I would have to face that because I had seen people who had left before me. And that's what we did to them. I get it.
Right.
I get it,
So what do you hope people will take from your book?
What do I hope?
Yes.
What do I hope? Well, I wanted to show in my book, and the reason why I started way back, it's in 3 sections. The first section is about my life as a child, as I grew up. I wanted to demonstrate that there's a couple things. Each one of us in our life has our story. Everybody's got a story. We have a tendency to look at people and think, oh, well, that happened to her, but that would never happen to me, right? And so I wanted to take you all the way back to some of the reasons why we find ourselves getting involved in some sort of ideology or whatever. It doesn't happen like, oh, you're brainwashed. Well, no, and I use those, I use a lot of, or I define a lot of words in my book. The word brainwash, the literal meaning of brainwash means that you have been radicalized into an idea, usually by force or by imprisonment or torture. So when we point the finger at other people and say, oh, they've just been brainwashed by this person or by whatever. No, that really isn't the case. I was not brainwashed. I was already looking for that. The narcissist just glommed on to what I was already looking for. And so when we look at other people in our country and whatever, and just point the finger and say, oh, they're brainwashed. No, this is the way they think. And that comes way, way back to early indoctrination. As I was indoctrinated basically by the Catholic Church. And as I talk about, I left the Catholic Church at a very young age, but I was enamored by the saints. I wanted to be a saint. Not, oh, look at me, aren't I a good person? I wanted that transcendental experience that I had read about and studied about. So I set out, and I say in that chapter, it's the third chapter, usually when one is looking for something, they're usually running from something. And so I wanted to talk about my early childhood and growing up in the 50s and 60s in Los Angeles. A lot of people can relate to how we grew up in that generation. And when you look at my life, it was somewhat in an affluent background. People say, oh, well, you are this or you are that. Well, all that glitters is not necessarily gold. And when we look at people like Patty Hearst, for example, or other people, why would they do that? So
How old were you when you did join, by the way?
I was about 29.
29. Oh, you were actually
Yeah.
pretty old at that time.
Yeah, I was 29, but I had started, which I talk about in my book, of how it came about. It really happened about 3 or 4 years prior to that. And so I'd say I was about maybe 27.
Mhm.
But I was on a journey looking for that from the time I was 14. And I talk about it in the book of a comparative religions class that I took. And I was looking for nirvana, and I was looking for people who had could attest to, nirvana. They say that some yogis in India, through a certain meditation practice, experience God directly, experience nirvana. So I was on a pursuit of that from the time I was 14. And I finally met people who had said that they did experience that. And that's how I got involved. But I was on a journey for a long time. So I talk about that journey in the first part of the book of how I came to the Buddha field. And then the second part is about the Buddha field and what really went on. When you look at the film Holy Hell, you cannot tell a 30-year story in a 100-minute documentary. It's
Right.
impossible. So when I hear people when they see the film, and I've been on podcasts before, and I've listened to people who think that they know or understand what they're seeing in that footage, and they really don't. I mean, you can't, Will, I think, did a wonderful job, and it's an amazing film, but you can't tell a story of 150 people, a 30-year story in 100 minutes and really say, so what I wanted to do is I really wanted to give you a picture, a broader picture of really what the Buddha field was like. And, so what you think you see in that film, here's really what was going on. So in the second part of my book called The Buddha Field, I really go into a lot of the images that you see in the film and explain what life was like in the Buddha field, what the reality was like. And then and what my reality was like, which was very different than Will or the males. I didn't experience that kind of abuse. So I really discern the difference between what I think is being conned, which I think is more of a spiritual abuse. You know, and there was a collective deceit. You know, there's a hierarchy within the Buddha field with the elders and the immediate entourage, and it sort of goes down in layers as far as the privy of what those who knew what was going on behind closed doors that were not talking about it, those who participated in the deceit. I talk about some of the parlor tricks that the guru played on people, and some of the, you know, he was a fraud, a complete fraud. So there were people that were supporting that fraudulent behavior. So I say, you know, when people go to Disneyland, you know, you forego your disbelief to have fun. But what if you don't know it's a fraud? What if you don't know it's a fantasy? And what if everyone in your life, your family, your friends, and the person that you admire the most are all lying to you? What do you do with that? You know, it doesn't matter how intelligent you are. If they're good at it, then you can be subjected to it. And when you are, you know, I ask the question, are you a victim or a perpetrator? And I think both, you know, because you go along. And so I really get into the details of that in the second and the third part. And in the third part, I talk about 3 types of people that find themselves subjected to, you know, these kinds of situations. And, you know, I really analyze it in retrospect. So the third is called Reflections. And so that's really what I wanted to do in that book. I wanted it has a lot of research. There's probably 284 citations from textbooks as well as articles and periodicals about not only about the Buddha field and that mindset, but also the broader picture of what's happening in this country.
I think in just general society, we are also people who, like you said, are followers. We're afraid to speak out against something that we know a lot of us around us believe in, because we don't want to be disenfranchised from that group.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's identity.
It's just like people. I mean, society is like that. So you created a smaller little society that you lived within, that like in the army. I mean, you're a young boy, young woman, and all of a sudden you're in the service and you're taught to think totally different. And if you don't think the right way, you're going to be chastised by those who want you to think in that particular way, and others are going to ridicule you for not going along with the message.
Well,
and society in general is like that.
Yeah, and we're doing that to each other in this country today.
Yes.
You know, and those that are on the opposite side, we're ridiculing each other, and we're creating a tighter and tighter cult, basically. But you know, somebody asked me the other day in an interview, do I think that there's a difference between a cult and a religion, for example, or how would I define or recognize characteristics of a cult? And the first thing that I said, or the first thing that I see, is there's a difference between Socratic teaching and non-Socratic. And non-Socratic teaching is when you present an idea and then there's an argument and a discussion, and you are allowed to question, and you walk away with your own conclusions. But a non-Socratic teaching Did I say that right? A Socratic teaching is you get to argue and you come to your own conclusion. A non-Socratic is when you are dictated to. And so it really doesn't matter how big or small the group is. Some people like to define a cult as being a small sect, right? But I am defining it broader. I'm defining it when you cannot question a teaching and come to your own conclusion without being ostracized or demonized or ridiculed or what have you. When you are told and dictated to and indoctrinated into anything, then I would run like hell.
Well, where do
But
we run to? Because right now, that is how it is right now. What you just talked about is the way our society is right now,
exactly,
regardless of which side of the platform you're on.
Absolutely. And that is what my book is about. Because when people say to me, oh, I'd never be that stupid. Really?
Mhm.
Really? Is that true? So my book is so that we can all really, I'm using my experience, my 20 some odd years experience. I am opening the kimono, so to speak. And it's not a, you should be this and you're that and you're this. No, this is what I did.
Why do you think our society is like that right now? Why do you, is it because we're working too much? We don't have time to think for ourselves. So we are relying on other people to do all our thinking for us?
I think that's a valid point, David. I think that we are so overwhelmed with survival, basically. You know, who has time? Like I said in another interview, you know, if you have 2.5 years to do the research that I did, you know, to really delve into the whys of why did I do this and, you know, whatever, who's got that kind of time or interest? You know, I happen to be a researcher. That's what I do. But most people don't have that time. The reason why I wrote the book is to do all of the heavy lifting for you. And I try and do it in an entertaining way, I use a lot of humor, a lot of sarcasm, but I try and take you down a very personal journey, a real journey, not just a pedantic, you know, teaching, but
Right.
really to use myself as an example, so that those who don't, I mean, the kinds of the books that are behind me and the books that are over there, and you can't see them, but the books that I have waded through, the textbooks and the periodicals and whatever, are, I have tried to take that and make a Reader's Digest version for my reader that
Right.
doesn't have time to go through those textbooks. And, you know, there are some very good. Stephen Hassan, for example, who's an expert on cults. He's written several. I've read those books. But they're very dry, you know, and they're very sort of pedantic and they're textbookish. And so unless you have a vested interest in that topic, why would you want to read that? So I decided to really get very personal, and so that people could walk away with somebody's real experience instead of, you know, textbook pedantic kinds of teaching. And so that's why I wrote the book. I'm trying to reach the kind of people that are not scholars, that are not psychologists or whatever. And that's why I wrote it the way it was. I think you're right. Who's got the time for this? And it's also why I did an Audible for people who don't have time to read.
Which I
you
love
know,
Audibles, by the way.
Yeah, well, I do too, because I explained that as a child, I was dyslexic. I'm a slow reader. So thank God for Audibles, because most of these books and things I have done through Audible. And so I did an Audible I read it in my voice, because who knows the sarcasm or the rhythm better than me. I wrote the book, so I know what I'm trying to say. So I'm doing that so that people who otherwise would not do the deep dive that I did could walk away with maybe a broader perspective. I want people to know that yeah, like you said, what's happening in this world today, what's happening in this country today, what's happening in their churches today, what's happening with, they don't even know that it's happening, that they are being indoctrinated, and they're being indoctrinated by our media, by our echo chambers and by social media and stuff like that. And we have to just be aware. I wrote an article recently, which is on my website, radhiagleis.com, and it's called Stop the Steal of Our Mind. And I talk about how, we use wordsmithing. We use these buzzwords, to really put the hand up. You're a anti-vaxxer, Antifa, socialist, whatever. And once you just put up one word, you have stopped the conversation.
Or you're a Democrat, or you're Republican.
A Democrat or a Republican or a Trumpster or a this or that. And we can't help but to do that. We're trained to do that because those things easily stop a conversation, and they stop them in their tracks.
Actually, we're going to have to cut it short here a little bit in a couple minutes. But I do. I feel like the media vilifies whatever party they're for. I mean, CNN vilifies the Republicans. The Fox News vilifies the Democrats, which I think is really awful because.
So where are we going with that? We're never going to come together. And I say, you said, why do we do that? And I talk about this in my book. David, as long as we have identities, we will never have peace on earth. As long as there's a you and a me, an us and a them, we will never have peace on earth. And so we create these identities because, we have this idea that in our own little herd, and human beings are very herd bound, that there's a safety in that number. And so as long as we identify ourselves with one group or another, there is this false illusion of safety. And so unfortunately, it starts out usually as a good idea. Usually if there's a narcissistic leader who catches on to that, they will use that identity and they will expand it and nurture it. And this is how we become enemies of ourselves. It's no longer the human race. It becomes a different kind of species. And that is what my book is about.
Right. And I need to thank you for, and it's a very great book. And I hope you sell a lot of them.
I appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right, David. Thank you, dear.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.